In this section, we're going to talk about a tradition in literacy pedagogy which is called critical literacies. And perhaps I'll mention a couple of the more prominent people, the best known names. There's a lot of people in this tradition. Paulo Freire in Brazil is perhaps one of the most famous people. In the United States, Michael Apple has been someone who's argued for critical pedagogy of one sort or another. And I think the best way to introduce it is to compare it with the other paradigm that we spoke about earlier, which is didactic literacy. So didactic literacy was about formal rules of language, learning mechanical skills, becoming a proficient user, I suppose, learning to read and write in a basic kind of way. But also behind it was a kind of if you like, a kind of a moral or a set of values around passivity and compliance, and we're telling you things and you're going to do them and you're going to do them the right way. So, we speak, you listen kind of view of the world. And also in terms of its underlying politics, if you like, it's about social reproduction. It's not rocking the boat. It's about keeping the world the way it is. Just, you take away these basic skills and you go away and behave yourself, sort of. That's a caricature, if you like, of didactic pedagogy, really from the perspective of critical pedagogy. Now, how is critical pedagogy and critical literacies different? Well, as people like Freire and Apple would argue, it's underpinned by democratic values. It's about bringing up real issues in the classroom, discussing real things in the world that might be of personal concern, issues of justice, issues of pain and oppression in the world. It might involve that, but also just maybe things that are just grounded, things that are relevant, things happening in local communities, not things, in didactic pedagogy, things often tend to be a bit abstract and distant and formal, but these are things that are real and embodied in people's lives. It's also about people becoming active and participatory communicators, learning to write, learning to read in ways which are meaningful for their lives. And it's also about personal and social transformation. So the personal transformation is about becoming aware of yourself in the world, becoming somebody who can communicate effectively in the world for reasons which are perhaps sometimes transformative. That might be just becoming more able, getting a better job, or transformative in the sense of being a political agent, someone who can be an active citizen, whereas didactic pedagogy was notionally more neutral. But in fact, one could argue that in fact subtly it wasn't that neutral if it was about passivity and compliance. So what I've tried to do there is contrast the value sets of these two pedagogical approaches. In fact, as we've kept on saying, there is a role for some of the moves that are made in didactic pedagogy. It's not something that's to be dismissed totally out of hand. What I've really been trying to do here is just build a contrast between these two traditions within literacy pedagogy.
We've been talking a lot about the way in which text, written and spoken text make meaning. But what we need to remember is even when we're using exactly the same words, or even when we're engaging with exactly the same text, the meaning can vary for a whole range of reasons which we're going to explore together. But I just want to step back for a minute and remind us that traditional pedagogy around literacy, or what we call didactic literacy, was based on interpreting words and text around rules, or what we call grammar. That kind of pedagogy focuses on learning the skills to recognize when something was a noun or a verb, or how words came together to form a sentence. So those kinds of skills were important in making meaning. But basically it required the learner to absorb knowledge about these rules and the formality involved in making text, to be recipients of these texts, to understand them, to parse them, to talk about them, and to memorize in order to be able to respond appropriately to the meaning that the educator was looking for. So essentially it was about fitting in, learning to read text in a way that allowed you to fit in with the dominant culture or the dominant meanings that were available. For example, if we take something in literature like fairy tales, of course every student in our school system understands the power and meaning of fairy tales, but very many traditional fairy tales typically have a princess who is in some kind of need, a prince who comes and saves her, marriage at the end, living happily forever in a castle. But nowadays, of course, girls and boys read those stories in very different kinds of ways. Is marriage the only option for the princess? Is a castle the only thing that she might live in or he might live in? So although we read the stories and engage with them, where we come from influences the way we think about it. But it's not just literature. Even if we go to something in science, like water, for example, what does water mean to us? Is water just the scientific components and the properties of water? For example, in our local pond, how will we understand the meaning of that pond? What happens for young learners who've never seen a pond or just live in a city and a pond is something that is not within their consciousness or their experience? How do they value what happens in it if it's polluted or if fish are in it or if it's decorative? How do we respond to the relationship of water to cleanliness or drinking or aesthetics? Again, every learner will come even to something scientific like that with a set of experiences and perceptions which might affect the way they make meaning. And of course, if we go to a subject like history and take a topic like Thanksgiving, for some people when they read the stories of the so-called first meal together or other meals that we might organise and arrange for our families are these celebrations of a historic moment. Obviously, some people in our history regard the moment of contact between settlers and native peoples as a time of mourning, not a time of celebration. So even something as significant as Thanksgiving, which is a national holiday and it's a historic moment, people will interpret that differently, even though we're using exactly the same words and perhaps the same stories and images. So it does really matter that we understand that meaning is made in the interaction between the intention and the experiences of the person who utters the meaning or creates the meaning in text.